A couple of weeks ago, we did an activity where I had you preview your read theory before you completed it. Today I want to do the same thing again. So, this video will be a little bit of a review. Now, I've created a new read theory account, and the article you see before you is titled Bread Dough Rises. So in order to preview this, I'm going to look at the title, I'm going to look at the picture, and I'm going to look at the questions. The title is, as I said, Bread Dough Rises. So I'm looking at that and I'm thinking this is probably something about baking bread because it's involving bread and dough. I know that dough rises when we cook it, and so I think this is probably about bread. And I look at the picture and I see it's a picture of what looks like bread dough. And it looks like it's on a baking setup, and there's a rolling pin in the background and some flour. And so that further confirms for me that this is an assignment, this is an article about baking bread. And then finally, I'm going to look at the questions. And the first question says, this passage can best be described as a set of instructions, an outline for an experiment, a series of steps, an example of a recipe, or an explanation of a process. Now, I don't know yet what this passage is about, but because I've read that, I know that I'm probably looking for, it's going to either be a set of instructions, an outline for an experiment, a series of steps, an example of a recipe, or an explanation of a process. And you know what? I'm going to say, because it's talking about bread dough and it's about baking, it could be any one of these things. So I'm going to keep an open mind. One thing I will do is I'm going to come over here to Google Drive. This is something that I want you to do today. Either in Google Drive or a piece of paper, I want you to write down for me, based on your previewing, what do you think this passage is about? I'm going to say, I think this passage is about, computer catching up to me so that I can do the work. I think this passage is about baking bread because the title is about bread dough and it has a picture of bread dough. Very good. So I've recorded, based on, I've recorded what I think the passage is about and why I think that. So now I'm going to go ahead and read the passage, and it says, the ingredients in bread dough, flour, water, yeast, and sugar interact to make the bread dough rise. Here's how it works. That's interesting, because I know that one of the options I had for my questions was an explanation of the process. And now I have this sentence, here's how it works. So that makes me think it might be about a process. The water activates the yeast. The yeast then feeds on the sugar. The yeast produces carbon dioxide gas, a waste product, that gets released into pockets in the dough. As gas continues to accumulate, these pockets continue to expand. This expansion causes the bread dough to rise. So I look at my options again. Was that a set of instructions? Well, it wasn't really telling me how to do this. It just told me what happened. So I don't think it's instructions. I don't think it's an experiment. It is a series of steps. It is telling me what happens when dough is baked. But is it the best answer? I don't think it's a recipe. And that brings me back to an explanation of a process. This definitely seems like an explanation of a process to me, because it's not telling me to do anything, it's just telling me how this works. So I'm going to hit submit, and it says I got it. So now I'm going to finish this up, and then I'm going to come back for the last step. Okay, so since I was doing a preview, it really only had that one question for me. Yours will be a couple questions for a passage. But I want to stop and reflect. So now that I have answered my question on my passage, I want to look at Was my preview correct? I guessed that this passage was going to be about baking bread. And was that accurate? Well, in my case, it was almost accurate, but not quite. Why? Because when I read the passage, it was actually not talking about baking bread at all, but it was talking about, well, it was talking about baking bread, but it was talking about how bread dough works. So almost, but not quite. It wasn't talking about baking bread as in like a step-by-step process, but it was talking about the chemical reaction that takes place when bread bakes, when dough turns into bread. So I'm going to say almost, but not quite. This passage was about how dough becomes bread. There we go. So that's all I want you all to do today. I want you to go to Read Theory, preview the passage looking at the title, the picture, and the questions, and then tell me what you think the Read Theory passage is going to be about. Then, after you do that, go complete the Read Theory passage. When you are finished with that passage, write down question number 2, which is, were you correct? Yes, no, almost, but not quite, maybe. Were you correct, and why? Why were you correct? Or why were you incorrect? So this is what I want you to do today. Go ahead and check out the assignment I have up on Canvas for it, and then y'all have a good weekend. I'll have something when you come back on Monday.